Hey YouTubers, welcome to Costume Cinematographico, a profile of cinematic costumes from some of my favorite series, television, and movies. For my fourth episode, I want to do a comprehensive breakdown of the costumes of Game of Thrones. In this episode, I will be discussing in great detail the costumes of Sansa Stark from the HBO series Game of Thrones, based upon the books by George R.R. Martin, so careful for any spoilers for seasons 1 through 5. British costume designer Michelle Clapton designed 5 seasons of Game of Thrones, seen here accepting an Emmy Award for Outstanding Costume Design for Game of Thrones. She won 2 Emmys for the episodes The Prince of Winterfell and The Lion and the Rose, or the Purple Wedding episode as it's sometimes known. She left after season 5 and has been replaced by veteran costume designer April Ferry, although Clapton returned for some design work late in the season 6. The character of Sansa Stark is played by British actress Sophie Turner. She was cast in the role of Sansa Stark at age 13. Sansa Stark is the eldest daughter and the second child of Lord Eddard Stark of Winterfell and head of House Stark, one of the greatest houses of the realm. Her mother is Lady Catelyn Stark. Her siblings are Robb, Arya, Bran, and Rickon Stark. She is the half-sister of Jon Snow, Eddard's bastard son. If you saw my previous video on Cersei Lannister, I mentioned that George R.R. Martin based the book series, A Song of Ice and Fire, largely on the Wars of the Roses. Sansa Stark is likely based on one of 2 ginger-haired, real-life characters from that period of British history. The first is Elizabeth of York, the eldest child of Henry VI and Elizabeth Woodville, Queen Consort of England and the first Tudor queen. Like Sansa, Elizabeth was known to be charming and beautiful and was used as a political pawn in marriage. The second was Elizabeth of York's granddaughter, Elizabeth I, Queen of England and Ireland and the 5th and last monarch of the Tudor dynasty. Elizabeth lived for a long time with her stepmother and legal guardian Catherine Parr, who remarried Thomas Seymour after the death of her father Henry VIII. Thomas Seymour, in a fashion similar to Peter Baelish with Sansa, had an inappropriate relationship with his teenage stepdaughter Elizabeth in what eventually would become a scandal. The House Stark sigil is a gray direwolf on a white field, sometimes white and pale green. With that in mind, everything in Winterfell is in that cool palette of grays and blues, although the lighting and lens filters make it difficult to ascertain the correct color of the costumes. We see Sansa initially in a simple schoolgirl type smock with boatneck collar made from some homespun pocket weave fabric of wool or linen and a simple sash. If we look a little closer, we can see the woven fabric is slightly embossed and embroidered with a simple white flower. Here is a sample of this type of weave, sometimes also called metalaze, which translates loosely as quilted. Sansa's cloaks, like all of the cloaks we see in the pilot episode, are in cool tones made from homespun woolens with fur skin collars. Michelle Clapton says of the North, where a character comes from is indicated through the color and cut of the costume. When we first see Sansa, she wears things in a Stark way, very well, but they are slightly clumsy and the cloth is rather homespun. Sansa's wool serge cloak is in soft gray tones, the lightest of all the Stark clan. Cersei calls her Little Dove early on, and the dove gray tones are in keeping with that moniker. One of the first notable costumes we see Sansa in, again in cool gray tones, although in certain lighting it appears slightly mauve, is this gown with detachable sleeves and collar. Sansa tells Queen Cersei that she's made her own gown, and we know from the other scene with the septa, and unlike her sister Arya, that she is skilled at sewing and embroidery. The embroidery covers the little knots that decorate the front of her dress, but also the upper parts of the sleeves, attached through hand-sewn grommets with lacing and a collar. Here is a close-up look at the collar embroidered by Michelle Carragher, the principal embroidery artist for the Game of Thrones series. Carragher has an extensive background as a textile conservator and borrows heavily from this knowledge. Here, she has incorporated the tellyfish into Sansa's collar, the sigil of her mother's crest. Here is the same gown again, without the additional sleeves and collar. Sansa wears a beautiful cream embroidery lace chemise under her gown with full bishop sleeves and a drawstring neckline. In the Season 1 episode of The King's Road, and having admired the clothing of Cersei's handmaidens, Sansa creates this mauve gown, attempting to fit in with the royal party. The gown is made from a coarse silk with full sleeves, a short train, and it's somewhat ill-fitting. This was actually a deliberate design decision made by designer Michelle Clapton. From the back vantage, we can see that the dress is tightly laced up the back. Sansa, seen here in episode 4, has embroidered flowers and leaves, the little knots along the neckline and on the sleeves with gold and green embroidery floss. In Michelle Clapton's tourney gown design for Sansa, her notes read on the sketch, embroidered and beaded at neckline, in brackets, Sansa's own work, mauve rough silk now fitted more than earlier dresses / gold silk lining to sleeves. At the tourney, Sansa wears her hair back, more in keeping with the styles of the South. Still in mauve tones, her fitted gown looks more refined with the lowered neckline and elaborate embroidery. In this image, we can see the beautiful embroidered silk sleeves constructed from a coordinating mauve silk fabric. In this scene, Sansa is sewing the embroidery herself. In this other close-up, we can see the handiwork again of Michelle Carragher. Mauve silk rosettes along the neckline are lined in gold silk, and Carragher has added little gold leaves and hanging beads from the flowers. The gold leaves and flower embroidery motif extend from the shoulder and carry on down into the greenish gold silk gores on the hips. Carragher also incorporated gold beading and mesh into this beautiful direwolf motif. In this scene, Joffrey offers Sansa a Lannister pendant as an apology, but it's really a manipulation on his part. Like Cersei's gold pendant, the Lannister sigil of the lion is engraved. Here it is in close-up. We first see Sansa wearing a Cersei-inspired kimono wrap gown in the Season 1 Episode 7 when she begs King Joffrey to show her father mercy. Unlike a Japanese kimono, Sansa's soft green paper silk gown overlaps right over left and is secured with silk ties. And like her mauve gown, beige silk panels are added to the gown for extra fullness. She wears the same gown again in the following episode for her father's confession and summary execution, with the addition of a belt made from a cut-work metal. Notice that she's still wearing the Lannister necklace. On her right shoulder is some pretty dragonfly embroidery. Michelle Carragher uses a Japanese-style embroidery in her motifs, a technique that is often used on kimonos. Using untwisted silk floss and with embroidered variations on the long and short stitch, or satin stitch as it's sometimes called, and in Japanese it's referred to as hiranui, the resulting work is flat and shiny. The labor-intensive satin stitch is often used to completely fill in shapes, such as flower petals and leaves, as we see here. In the Season 2 episode Garden of Bones, Joffrey calls Sansa to the throne room, here wearing the same soft green gown. We have a peek at Sansa's pretty taupe gray petticoat with a wide brocade border in this scene. She has returned to wearing her butterfly pendant and ring. Here it is in a closer image. For the Season 1 closer, Sansa has completely accepted the look of the southern capital. With her auburn hair adorned in a roll updo, her torment is worn clearly on her face as her pale skin is washed out by the hue of her soft rose textured silk gown and gold belt. No longer a girl and with no allies at her side, she now has to embrace her new harsh reality. The gown features overly long sleeves and a bell skirt. She is wearing some form of crinoline under her dress to create the shape. We can see some of the embroidery at the back of the gown and wrapping around the front. The Lannister pendant is completely gone and replaced with her butterfly necklace. Here's a closer look at the fine embroidery around the neckline and the coordinating embroidered panels at the side. She wears the same gown and hairstyle in the Season 2 episode, The North Remembers. She wears it again in Season 2, Episode 6. During this chase scene and attempted rape scene, Sansa's gown flies open and we get a good view of her underthings, including her corset, underskirt, and stockings. The boned and lace corset is similar to British 18th century corsets, which we will look more closely at in a bit. In an important scene late in Season 2, Sansa wakes and discovers that she is flowered, and Queen Cersei is quickly notified. Sansa wears a beautiful dove gray linen shift and matching robe with metallic ecru embroidery down the front. The gown is more in keeping with the North and Winterfell. As a captive in King's Landing, Sansa has very little control over how she dresses. So in the Season 2 episode Blackwater, she leaves her kimono-style gowns for the most part in favor of a symmetrical-style robe gown that's more in keeping with Margaery Tyrell. The gowns are not too much of a departure so as not to be offensive to Cersei. They are still modest with long flowing sleeves, but are a bit more fitted on the upper arm. She also abandons the tightly rolled updo, a style she so greatly admired at the beginning. Sansa returns to the mauve palette in this floral jacquard print. She continues to wear her gold belt, and in this image we can see the back portion is created from gold chainmail and fastened at the center back. She wears this look again in the Season 3 episode The Bear and the Maiden Fair. And again in the Season 4 opener. It appears that she has outgrown it by this time, almost 2 years later. It's looking rather snug across the back and upper arms. So let's have a look at her undergarments. In the Season 3 episode The Climb, we get a rare glimpse at Sansa dressing in her chamber with the assistance of Shae. Here we get a better view of her corset. Clapton has created a mashup of looks because in traditional Japanese dressing, the undergarments would reflect the shape of the kimono, which the corset clearly does not. This style of corset is most similar to the 18th century corset seen in England and France during this time. Historians cannot confirm if women wore such a structured undergarment during the 14th century, but it's most likely that they didn't, and they would have had some form of reinforcements added to their gowns instead. While Sansa's corset is strapless, this particular stay that we see here, an earlier version of the corset, is a pretty good likeness to the corset worn by Sansa. This stay dates back to the late 1700s and was hand sewn from silk damask, lined with linen and reinforced with whalebone. This stay has hand grommeted and laced up the center back. Here's another British-made stay from the 1780s. It's constructed from linen and hand sewn with linen thread. This stay is from the Victoria and Albert collection in London. It has applied ribbon, chamois, and whalebone reinforcements. Modern reproduction corsets and stays are reinforced with bone channels filled with spiral or steel boning. The bone channels are machine sewn and the outer edges bound with bias. The grommets on this model reproduction are hand sewn. The desired effect gives the wearer a cinched waist and accentuated décolletage. Sansa wears this simple dark mauve matte silk gown with gold silk facings and piping around the neckline in the Season 3 episode The Climb. The dress is clean with no embroidery or embellishments. You can see in greater detail the simple narrow piping along the gown openings and the turned back sleeves. The only flourishment is Sansa's simple dragonfly necklace. In another Tyrell-inspired gown, Sansa wears this lovely woven silk mauve gown with an ecru lace overlay pattern on the shoulders, sleeves, and skirt in the Season 3 episode Dark Wings. She wears it here with a light purple scarf and her butterfly necklace. She's also wearing her hair more like Margaery Tyrell. She wears the gown again in episode 6 but without the scarf. We can see just a hint of the butterfly necklace peeking behind her hair. Here is a closer look at the silver butterfly with a black center stone. We also catch a glimpse of the gold dragonfly closures at the front panels of her gown. Sansa wears this gown again in another scene with Loras in the episode The Climb. In Sansa's wedding to Tyrion in the season 3 episode The Bear and the Maiden Fair, she wears a spectacular silk damask wrap gown in gray and golden taupe colors, all depending on the lighting. The gown features a fitted wrap bodice with cap sleeves, 2 engraved gorget-style armor pieces on each hip, and a seamed full skirt that leads out into an extended train. The costume is seen here without the addition of the embroidered bands or collar, which we'll see later. In an interview, embroidery artist Michelle Carragher states, "For this dress, Michelle wanted it to be confined, restricted bodice shape with bare, vulnerable arms. She wanted an embroidered band that would be wrapped around the bodice and tell Sansa's life story. Obviously, we imagine that the wedding dress has been commissioned by Cersei and the Lannisters for Sansa, and so the embroidery would have come from Cersei's mind. We guessed that it wouldn't be romantic or lovely and girly and pretty with dainty flowers, but a real strong message of dominance, saying that we own you now, Sansa." Tyrion drapes Sansa with his ecru and crimson robe, festooned with the Lannister lion during their wedding ceremony. Here is a close-up look of the bodice bands and the silk damask fabric. Carragher says of the embroidery, "For the wedding band, I started at the back of the waist with some Stark direwolves and Tullyfish entwined that represent Sansa's parentage. Then, as we move to the side, the Lannister line is tangling with the direwolf and emerging on top, representing Sansa being seduced and then controlled by members of the House of Lannister. As it moves up the center, there's a central ascending lion that's got a Baratheon-like crown, a nod to Joffrey's parentage. And at the back, the Lannister line is stamped onto it, representing how the Lannisters now have total ownership over this girl who was once Stark." Sansa walks with Tyrion and Shae in this season 3 episode. Sansa wears a woven gold and purple silk damask gown, and if you look closely at the turned-back sleeves, you will see the reverse side of the fabric. The collar and opening are piped with a coordinating silk. The gown features the same dragonfly closures. If you look closely at the undergown, you will see that the skirt has a wide border in a higher quality purple fabric. Of Sansa's gown for the purple wedding, Michelle Clapton says, "Sansa has gone back to mauves. It's a very plain dress. It just looks really beautiful as well, with a pale blue necklace that I designed for the deed." The gown is constructed from a lustrous silk madelaise. Here are some close-up examples of this type of fabric. Of Sansa's necklace, Clapton says, "I looked actually at lots of Art Deco and Art Nouveau necklaces, as well was inspired by the same period. It's actually very exciting. I rarely design jewelry." Here are 2 examples that perhaps inspire Clapton's design. On the left is an example of a medieval necklace from the 15th century portrait of Margaret of Anjou, one of the pivotal historical characters from the Wars of the Roses. And the other necklace on the right is a vintage Art Deco necklace in white metal and blue-cut glass crystal that dates back between 1915 and 1935. In this promo shot, Sansa wears her hooded traveling cloak. We first see her wearing this in Season 4, Episode 3, when Sansa flees King's Landing after the Purple Wedding, when Ser Dontos drapes her with it during their escape. The cloak and the full hood has a similar cut to the cloak worn by Meryl Streep in the movie The French Lieutenant's Woman, designed by Oscar-winning designer Tom Rand. We see her wearing this ensemble in the Season 4 episode First of His Name. Here's a closer look in a promo shot. The cloak is constructed from a pocket weave fabric such as wool or linen, and then batik dyed to create patterns. The circle cape appears to be unlined, while the oversized hood is faced with the same fabric. In the Season 4 episode The Mountain and the Viper, Sansa is seen here sewing a new outfit for herself, a look that is known as Dark Sansa. As Clapton explained it, in keeping with the concept that Sansa had to plausibly assemble this new dress from available materials, Sansa is supposed to have gathered messenger raven feathers from the castle's rookery. Also, Sansa is making some effort to hide her true identity, so she dyed her auburn hair black. Here is Michelle Clapton's original concept art for Dark Sansa. The look on the far right ended up being the final costume. And here is a close-up look at the feathered collar from the costume in exhibit. So, in an interview, Clapton explains the symbolism behind Sansa's choice of jewelry. The necklace, she says, was based on the idea that Arya had Needle. And at the end of the necklace, there's this point, a spike, which is like Sansa's smaller version of Needle. It's a jewelry idea of Needle. She's finally taking them on. We see Sansa in the same costume again in Season 5. Sansa adds black leather gauntlet-like gloves to her look. In the debut Season 5 episode called The Wars to Come, we first see this matching set of houppelons, a floor-length outer garment from the Middle Ages, on both Sansa and Littlefinger. And again in the Season 5 episode of The High Sparrow. The outer garments have stand-up collars and false, full-length hanging sleeves. Both are constructed from a tweed-like fabric and lined in fur. If we take a closer look, we see that the tweed-like fabric of Littlefinger's cloak is just slightly different to the woven diamond motif fabric of Sansa's coat. The sleeves are lined in a similar, if not identical, golden taupe brocade fabric. The fitted sleeves of Sansa's undergown are made from the same silk madelaise, albeit in a different color, as the gown from Joffrey's wedding. For her second wedding in Winterfell, in her marriage to Ramsay Bolton, Sansa embraces both the Stark and Tully traditions in this winter white wedding coat. Sansa's elaborate braid updo is back to her natural auburn color. The silk brocade coat has a tapered waist and full skirt with a long sweeping train. The coat is grommeted and laced at the back. The textured dove gray silk undergown has the signature metal drawstring high collar and softly drawn in cuffs. The fur capelet pays homage to her Stark legacy. Clapton has indicated that the bell shape is also supposed to somewhat resemble the Lyanna Stark crypt statue. Sansa even found in the castle some of the clasps that her mother used on her dresses, which are shaped like the Tully fish sigil. In the Season 5 Episode 7 called The Gift, Sansa begs Theon for help. While locked in her bedchamber and in a moment of vulnerability, she wears this silk shift instead of her usual bedclothes. This intimate undergarment, a version of a Japanese kimono slip or harajuban, as you can see here, is worn without any other foundation garments. In the Season 5 episode Kill the Boy, Sansa wears this patterned silk jacquard gown and a simple cotton undergown. Her color palette has been transitioning from gray-blue to mauves and purples, and now it's returned back to cooler tones again. She wears the gown with a collar that looks like one of her embroidered collars from Season 1. The bodice and arms are fitted above the elbow with full kimono-style bottom sleeves. Sansa wears it again in the Season 5 finale, Mother's Mercy. You can see how similar the cut is to the King's Landing gown from Season 3. With the exception of the color, the cotton underskirts are almost identical. It's interesting to point out that the cotton borders the wide hem, finished with a pretty embroidered scallop, since it would usually not be seen except when walking. This shows, I think, that nobility can also be frugal. Here's a closer look at the butterfly closures, which are identical to the other gown, although I'm not sure where they would have come from unless there's a stash of findings somewhere in the castle. At the closing of Season 5, Sansa and Theon's fate is uncertain, and we won't find out her outcome until the Game of Thrones Season 6 debut episode. Have something to add to the discussion? Please leave a comment in the comment section below, and if you're a fan of Game of Thrones, please check out my other video, The Costumes of Cersei Lannister. And if you like what you see, please subscribe to my channel and like my video. You can also check out my Pinterest page, where I've pinned many of the images you see in the video. Thanks so much for watching.